Well, here I've got the cam that operates the mirror and capping plate, and also transfers the action through to the front cam, which operates the release, I think, but it also, through this gear here, cocks the shutter. So these have got to go into the camera, and the spring on here has to be pre-tensioned by at least one full turn before we put the front plate in place, which is a source of much weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's a tiny adjustment screw here which is used to adjust the cocking action slightly. It'll compensate for less than a tooth of timing difference in getting everything in the right place. That's usually pretty stiff in position, doesn't want to move. If you've taken the cam out of the camera and you're putting the same cam back into the same camera, there's no reason to muck around with that. That's probably going to be fine just as it is. If you're fitting a new cam because the one that was in there was broken, then you may have to do something else to that. You may have to back that screw pretty much all the way out and use that as your start position. Okay, well, I'm going to get this cam in place first, so I'm going to get that into position. And it has to go at a particular angle. When it's engaged with the gear on the cocking rack at the back of the camera there, it should be at about, I don't know what they say that was, about 30 degrees I think. Somewhere between 20 and 30, something like that. See if I can get this thing engaged. That's it, it's just fallen into place. And you can see that the rectangular section on that cam is at an angle like this. That's correct. Okay, so the front piece. Now this is different on a Retina 4, Reflex 4, than it is on the Reflex S or 3. This little gear on the front is deeper. So they're not strictly interchangeable. I'll get that in position on the body here. Let's release that mirror. Now the spring here has to be rotated at least one full turn clockwise. I can see from the looks of this it's going to be 1.5 turns, because this is obviously all fairly new. It doesn't look like any of this stuff's ever been used. I've got a tool here to engage that spring. And I've got a little bracket that I need to fit on here temporarily to hold that spring. Once I've rotated it into position, I need to be able to hold the tail of that spring in place before I fit the front of the camera. So I've got a little bracket made here. A little notch visible right here that I'm going to get the tail of that spring hooked into. So I'll get this tool, which has got a slot to pick up that spring. Rotate it. That was half a turn. That's a full turn. Now I've got to get that spring tucked in underneath that little bracket, like that. Wriggle my tool off. And there I've got it pre-tensioned. Right, so that's like a ticking time bomb now. It's that's ready to fly out. So to get the washers in place, these are our dished washers, and as I've said, they go in in opposed directions. So I've got the first lot I've put in there, they're cup side up. The second lot I'm putting in a cup side down. And the third lot I'm putting in a cup side up again. And I have to get the front of the camera fitted without disturbing these washers. Which is tricky. I'm just checking that my meter drum is where I'd expect it to be. I'm just looking carefully at this. It all looks in place. This fibre washer here is going to be the death of me. If I don't get that off that wire, it's going to drop down and annoy me no end because it won't stay where I've put it. So I'm just going to wipe the top of that wire with a bit of acetone to soften that paint and hopefully lift that washer off there completely. If it was glued firmly in place at the top there, it wouldn't cause me any trouble at all. But flapping around loose, it's just going to drive me crazy. Alright. So I have my shutter here ready to go on. Now the shutter should go on in the uncocked position. That's good, that's all neutral. The wire here has to feed up into this slot and hole here. And that I have to do pretty much first. Got to feed that past the mirror. Get that lowered into place. Lift the chrome trim back slightly. This is still well clear of the surface here. To press the mirror so it goes down below the that little pad on the front of the camera. This is seated in position. Two of the mounting screws for the front of the camera I can put in place at the bottom here. They've got to pass through the washers without disturbing anything. And I only do those up very lightly indeed. Just want to make sure that they are there. At the top of the camera, I haven't not pulling that into line yet. I've got some longer screws that I'm going to pass right through those washers to hold them in position. And they're just started, the threads are just started and no more. I'll check that mirror flips down out of the way. I'm going to give this knob a little wriggle down here to see if it's coupled with the back of the shutter. It looks like it's coupled with my meter drum up here, so that's looking good. The cam, I'm just having to push that across to get it engaging with the hole in the front of the camera. That's just clicked loosely into place there. It's just fallen into place. I'm going to try the film advance. It didn't move the shutter at all. the gear can't have been coupled across there. Okay, I've got to do that again. This is a task that you sometimes it goes first time, no problems. Other times you're there doing it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times before you can get the thing both correctly sitting in place and with the gears correctly timed. Check what I've got in place and what I haven't. It looks like I've still got my shaft and everything in place at the top. My washers are all in place. I'm a bit uncertain about the shape of that wire. I might have to reshape that slightly. Not sure the shape's quite correct. Yeah, I've just given that a bit more of a push out this way. This shutter, it's not cocked at all. It never contacted that front gear there, that gear at the front. And when I get this on, this arm, I'm going to zoom me out of it, you see none of this. When I get this on here, this arm has to pass into this gap between this arm and that thing. Let's see if I can get this. Got to get that wire in there. Lower the shutter in at the base. Getting that arm in on the right side. That wire, why is it? Oh, it's still sitting back so far. Okay. Let's get the chrome trim lifted slightly. Get the mirror depressed. Drop that front down into place. I'll get those screws started at the bottom. I don't think my meter drum connection is quite lined up. So I just want these screws started far enough that the washers can't fall out of place. Not putting any tension on that. And the same at the top, I'll have those long screws. I just want them started and no more. To stop those springs, those washers from falling away. Okay. I don't think that my meter drum here is coupled. I'm just giving that a wriggle. It doesn't seem to be falling into line with that drum at the bottom. It's not coupled to anything in the shutter, it's just the drum itself. We're going to couple it to the shutter later so I can wriggle about with this a bit without causing any serious issues. It's just not dropping down. I'll try pressing my camera across at the top here, get that lined up. That's partly lined up. What about this meat now? Is this going to line up? Yeah, that's coupled. Let me tighten those screws up lightly at the bottom. Keep my drum coupled to the cord. That's good. And here, it's not quite back, so I know that gear's not coupled correctly yet. that cam is, oh, did it just fall into place? I think it did. Let's see if it cocks the shutter now. There we go. Okay, so the shutter's cocking. That's all good. I'll take that long screw out of there now and put the appropriate screw in. Run that down. Run down the two at the base. And the other screw here, I can take this long one out and put the appropriate screw in there. At the top of the camera I can take this bracket off now. That no longer needs to hold that spring because that's being held back by the front of the camera at this point. Let's try another speed. Yeah, that's all working nicely. That's nice and prompt, everything moving smoothly. Okay, so my flash contact wire over here, I've just got to make sure that it doesn't foul the mirror or anything at the back here. Or the capping plate. Yeah, that looks good. Right, so that washer, that paper wash that was causing me so much grief falling down the wire, that can go back in place now. And I will glue that down. And that'll be good. What am I going to use to glue it? Or some glue, I suppose. I think I'm just about due a new tube of adhesive because this stuff's kind of a bit gluggy in the tube. If I can unplug it, we might be right. It's a bit thick and glutinous. I want some around the wire to bond it to that washer. And a bit around that washer to bond it to the top of the camera. Well, that's a mess. That's better, that'll do. That's safe as houses. Okay. So with that coupled, we've got our meter drum coupled to the wheel at the base of the camera. As I move that settings wheel, you can see the meter drum moving. Next thing I've got to do here is set my lens mount to film plane distance. And I can just tell that I'm a mile away from correct at the moment. So I'll just tighten these 4 screws down some more and then I'll go and get my gear to set that up. I'm just judging the distance here to see which surface is high and which is low. Now I think if I take about a quarter of a turn back from that point where I had those surfaces level, I should be somewhere in the ballpark of where my adjustment needs to be. I need my shutter release button on here now so I can carry on and do my adjustments. So I need to be able to put the cable release on there. So here's my shutter release button, and the screw for that is a large headed screw. It's like none other on the camera. It's that one. It's working nicely. On B, that works nicely too. Okay, I'll set up to do my lens flange to film plane distance. Right, to get my lens mount to film plane distance correct, I've got an old pressure plate here. I've milled out the points here and here so that it'll sit on this surface, the flat surface, not up on these guide points here. So this sits right on the rails like a piece of film, except it's more rigid than a piece of film. I can put my cable release in here, cock the shutter, release the shutter. My cable release locks, so it'll lock and stay open. It would do if I had the lock set correctly. Yeah, so the shutter is now open. I've got my depth mic here. Well, actually it's a Mitsu Toyo vernier, but it'll do the job. And what I'm looking for is 47.60 millimeters between the film plane, measured at these broken brass inner pieces here, and the film plane. And we've got screws at 4 corners to adjust. So I'm seeing what I've got here, 47.68. So I'm going to need to tighten up screws here and probably here. 47.68 the other way, so that's very even. I'm going to tighten these a quarter of a turn and see what I get. That'll reduce the distance, of course, so we should be able to see that on the gauge. 47.60. 47.59. I'll slacken that one off slightly. 47.60. Okay, so I'm pretty close. I'm virtually bang on it. Now what I want to do is measure back as far as possible towards this point, back as far as possible towards that point, and the same here and here, to make sure that this is level, it's not canted to one side. I know it's pretty good in the middle. I need to get it as best I can all the way across. So 47.59 if I come back as far as here. So I'm going to slacken that screw off slightly. .6, that in this direction. 47.59 still over here. I'm going to try across these points. .59. So I'm too low at this side, and it may well be that one of those is affecting both reading points there. .60. 0.60, and at this direction 0.60, 0.61. So I'm slightly high here. I'll move that screw in slightly. Point 0.61. Point 0.60. I think you get the idea. 0.60. 0.60. 0.59. So I've got to loosen up on this one. There's some interaction between these screws, of course, as the whole thing shifts, but I should be able to get it better than that. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Six one. Okay. Now it's still coming up 6-1. Six zero. 6-0. 5-9. 6-0. 6-0. If I can get round once and they're all 6-0, I'll be very, very happy. 6-0. 6-0. Okay. My depth appears to be good. I can slacken that off, remove that cable release, take that plate out the back. So my lens mount to film plane distance is correct. What more can we do here? Well, there's two screws have to go in the front here. I should be able to find those. That's one of them, and that's the other one. I just hold down that chrome trim, and for reasons that escape me, every time I reach for one of these screwdrivers it seems to be gone. Shall we tempt fate and see if the self-timer works? Yep, that's good. Alright, at this stage the next thing I'll be needing to deal with is the prism.